Alright, I just want to do a little thinking here about John Locke and his political philosophy. Mostly I'll be talking about here is this second treatise on government. The first treatise, anymore, the first treatise isn't really read. It isn't really read anymore because it's mostly a argument against Sir Robert Filmer, who argued despotism and monarchy, and that no freedom and no property and such. So he basically argues against that. But in the second treatise, he kind of branches out and talks about what he believes in and what his arguments in his political philosophy is. So I'm kind of gonna go over that. This has a lot to do with the law of nature and the state of nature and the state of wars. Also has to do with property and liberty. So let's get started here. He states that all government is limited, or should be limited in its power, and exists only by consent of the governed. So this is I want to liken this somewhat to John Stuart Mill, J.S. Mill. He has a similar writings on government and politics in that it should be about the government. It should be about the governed. He differs from Locke in that he argues a despotism, but a despotism in a adequate way, in that the people aren't governed over via a tyrannical monarch and such. I have a couple of videos on that. Actually, I have one that's on the politics, so you can go watch that if you want to learn about Mill. And if you want a lot of stuff on Mill, go see Gregory B. Sadler's channel. He's a philosophy professor who has a lot of videos on Mill, a lot of videos on Bentham. So it's a lot of really good stuff on utilitarianism, and he kind of goes into both of those texts. Mill's utilitarianism and Bentham's principles of morals and legislation. All men are born with a certain freedom. All men are born equal, and they are born of certain freedom. The government can't and should not be able to remove any of that freedom by way of being too powerful and enslaving you. So it's a lot of things about that. We are born free. All men are born free. All men are born equal, and the government is wrong whenever it is allowed to exert tyrannical power over it that limits that freedom. And the government should be able to exercise the power by way of the consent of the governed, and by no other means. Okay. He has a main theme about freedom, human freedom, and that we shouldn't, we should never be slaves. We should never enslave ourselves to anything, especially if it's, especially if we don't choose to be like that. In the two treatises about political freedom, and he has a letter on toleration, which is about religious freedom. So then he kind of talks about what is political power. What is this idea of political power? It is a right of making laws with penalties of death, and employing force in the community to execute such laws. So it's also to preserve property, and it's a certain kind of power that is superior to that of others, but it's consented by the people who are governed. Those who have political power give a certain consent to the government, to the government, to these people who have this political power to rule over them in a certain way, which is adequate and right. It doesn't doesn't limit property or freedom or liberty. Excuse me. Ice is stuck. I'm running out of water as well. I just filmed a 40-minute video about Plantinga's religious epistemology. Anyway, so political power is a certain few's rights of making laws and executing them and enforcing them, with penalties of death on those who don't really obey them. But this is supposed to be done in such a way, according to Locke, which is by the consent of the governed, and does not limit, of course, property, freedom, liberty. Liberty and freedom are kind of two very loosely tethered ideas. Let's see here. All men are in a state of perfect freedom. They are born in this state of perfect freedom, and they're in a state of perfect equality. Natural freedom is everyone born the same way and with the same advantages. We're all born in the same way. We have this potentiality to, do certain things, and we have all of these advantages and all these things that a lot of times in this world and in the past and now, the government has limited, and property is a interesting notion, which I will get to. Everyone is naturally free and equal. So a state of nature is a law of nature which obliges everyone. The state of nature is the way everyone is before someone else intervenes. It's the way everything is, the way we are born before a certain political power or something else intervenes. Let's see. A state of nature is men living together amicably, employing natural. It's kind of like a pre-political state, and men living in civilly with others prior to political powers, I guess. I can't read my handwriting sometimes. A state of nature is obviously a state of also of perfect freedom and equality. Political power must be only used for public good. That's where it kind of parallels with Mill a little. It's a consequentialist political theory in that what should be done, it should be done for public good. And I've kind of thought about that as to whether that's a really good way to go about it, because ethics has a bearing on politics. A normative ethical theory can be used into formulating a political theory as to how societies and people should be governed. But that should be at least one kind of standard. People should be political power should be used only to promote public good. God gave earth to all of us. The law of nature obliges everyone, and breaching peace is a declaration of war and moves into a state of war. a state of nature which obliges everyone. It's this pre-political state where when someone of political power breaches the peace, we can have a political power which doesn't breach that peace, but we can have that, but there is a lot of time political power which breaches that and leads to a state of war. A state or law of nature is the the pre-political thing, in that following that, what is led is to a magistrate that is going to reinforce this peace that is there, that is born to all of us with liberty, freedom, and equality. And also, he also rejects slavery. There should be no legislative restrictive powers. There should be no aggressing on another, leading to states of war and hindering freedom. Property. The notion of property is meant. What is meant by that is the person, yourself. So slavery would be a breach on your property. Property includes everything you own, and who you are. You're a person, basically. And slavery is a restrictive power, which restricts your property and also your freedom, your liberty. Development of man's reason frees him from parents' protection. We all are inherently free, but when we have this development of reason from this pre-political state, this is contrasting with Sir Robert Filmer, in that who said that men are subject to parents' rule. This parent figure is kind of like a restrictive thing, which once you have reason, according to Locke, which frees you of that. But Filmer says that we are all always subject to this rule of your parents, or you're over this restrictive thing. Civil law abiding society is inconsistent with the monarchy of Filmer. So Filmer was just kind of talking about this idea of a monarchy and a despotism, which is like a very restrictive government and abusive political power, just because of how much it would restrict the freedom and equality. Community comes from consent of the majority, and political power and its ability to rule over others comes from that community of the majority. Consent of governed is only justified. Is the only kind of government that can be justified. Consent of the governed by the majority. So you have the governing and the governed. The governed is, of course, who is being governed. I would have to agree with this. Governing and the governed. The governed is, of course, who is being governed. I would have to agree with this. This is very, very interesting to compare this to Mill, because Mill has similar ideas. And for Locke, the only kind of government that is justifiable, good, and not restrictive of equality and freedom and of the state of nature itself is by a government which comes from consent of the governed. And a form of that could be democracy, could be various things. I mean, democracy has been shown to be corrupted and kind of corrupting from its original idea, corrupting from its original aim, I guess. And with this government, people should have rights to alter that. This consent of the governed has the right to alter the government if it is not working by this. And sadly, if a government is abusing this political power, then it's likely that the consent of the government doesn't really matter and can't really alter anything. So this, I think, along with Mill and his political philosophy, is really, really, really interesting in that there should be a government which is based on good. And I think right now, I mean, Locke is actually something that you'll hear about if you, in elementary school. It wasn't really from a philosophical perspective, but it was talked about. It's not like a life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. I don't know if that was Locke, but he was taught from a historical perspective in my history classes when I was in fifth and sixth grade. But it's just kind of like, it kind of makes you think, because you have to think, like, what governments nowadays and back then and even before have ever really governed by this? Some do, I will say that, but it's very, very few. And some might say that the U.S. governs by that. I would have to disagree with that. I mean, it's fallen into a two-party stagnance, which was stated by Washington in a letter at the end of his presidency to be dangerous, and honestly, it gets no one anywhere. So that's kind of what I'm kind of thinking about here with this government stuff. Does a government anymore govern by way of trying to promote public good, and that the only reason a idea of political power should be exercised is to promote public good? And I would say no. That's very, very little. Even in more safe countries and more democratic countries, there are so many issues that are not really solved, or not really attempted at being solved, because there's partisan ideas that are trying to be promoted, and not this idea of public good that is trying to be promoted. So I don't know. Let me know your thoughts, and I'm going to try and maybe I'll I don't know. I guess if you want to read good political philosophy, it's kind of like a summary of various figures. Read Leo Strauss and Joseph Cropsey, History of Political Philosophy. He kind of has a relatively long articles that goes from very early ones of Plato, even through like Searle and Foucault and such. I think Derrida even, yeah. So yeah, let me know your thoughts, and I'll probably go on to somebody else after this. I'll have to think about who I want to talk about next, because I have a lot of people. I mean, I'm not sure if I want to jump into more social theory, or read more out of maybe do Machiavelli. I'm not sure what I want to talk about in this. Anyway, thank you.